Okay, esteemed colleagues, let's get started because we have a really interesting afternoon session. So I'm really excited about this, and I won't spend too much time, but perhaps just to get a bit of your attention from you. So who thinks in your current practice you're not using enough innovative methods? Hands up. Oh, there are a few. Okay, who is already using some really innovative stuff in their work? Yay! Wow, two? Only two? Okay. And so for those of you who didn't raise their hands, I think we've got some exciting stories for you to show, because we're going to present, on the one hand, sort of the story of a couple of institutions who are broadening their use of methods, still working on the core stuff that is really important to us as evaluators, but slowly, gradually increasing the use of innovative methods using geospatial data, for instance. So we have something nice to show, and at the end, I hope that we'll wake you up with some, probably the coolest slides I've seen so far during this presentation. So that's a little cliffhanger right there. So my name is Sven Harten. I'm your bus driver tonight. No, this afternoon. Tonight maybe as well. let's see where we go. So I'll be moderating the session, and let's get just right started with our panel. So if I can ask Prashant please to come up and just make sure that.
So shall I just shout? Or?
Yeah, or just use the mic if you can.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Prashant. I work with the Office of Evaluation of IFAD, and after the introduction that Sven has given, if you're expecting some mind-boggling stuff in the presentation, not going to happen. What you're going to see is basically an institutional perspective of how we went about, how, let's just say, our thinking evolved in the field of environment and natural resource management, and a forward-looking perspective of where we want to be, rather than, you know, showing cutting-edge work. We are trying to do what we can, but this is also about how we as an institution have learned over a period of time on how to deal with environment and natural resource management and evaluation. So as you can see, the title is Evaluating Natural Resource Management in the Context of Smallholder Agriculture Development, IFAD's Experience. So just to start off, the purpose of the presentation is kind of to, as I said, to share the institutional thinking on how it has evolved, both of the institution as a whole and the evaluation office, and they can't be separated, and I'll show you how that has come about. And second is to kind of deliberate a bit on the methods and methodologies that have accompanied such evolution. And three, I think this is by far the most important one, we want to learn from others as well on what they are doing and what potentially we can do better. So, you know, just to give you a brief background, IFAD is an international financial institution and a UN agency which focuses on agriculture and rural development. Now, agriculture is a sector where NRM, you know, is a very intrinsic part of our operations. It's almost, it goes without saying in some ways. Now, you know, as you will see later, you know, added layers of complexity have come about. We have come to recognize them over a period of time because, you know, of climate change and, you know, the issues of recognition around it. Now, evolution of, you know, NRM and IFAD, this is over a period of time. You don't have to read the entirety of it. These are our strategies and how, you know, the recognition of natural resource management has been in each one of those strategies, and how it has come about to be recognized as one of the 4 key thematic focus areas in our operations. Now, I'll ask you one question, and anyone who responds to this gets to have a beer with me this evening. You're buying, by the way. What do you see like the change over a period of time? I think I've made it very easy in this. Sorry? Like, There must be something like on the objectives. Come on, guys. I mean, I've kind of highlight. Wake up. I mean, you don't want to buy me a beer? No, come on. That's climate change. I thought I would get quite a few beers. Okay, never mind. So you see, what has happened over a period of time is that there has been a recognition of, if you see in the objectives, natural resource management has always found a place. However, starting about 7 to 8 years ago, climate change has come about to become an important part, which is seen as a part of natural resource management as well. So this evolution has happened in the institution. Now, here, it has so happened that we have a system in the organization where we sign a harmonization agreement with the management. So the criteria that we set up for evaluating, we harmonize them with the self-evaluation system in the organization. We sign an agreement with the management of IFAD. So the thinking within IFAD has evolved. We set up a separate criteria for climate change, and as a result, that got reflected in the self-evaluation system as well. And the institution went through some other changes as well. IFAD also ended up appointing regional climate change advisors, natural resource management and climate change advisors. So these are people who are based in the regions. So there have been efforts, systematic efforts to mainstream it in the organization. And if you see the evolution of the methodology as well, I think over a period of time, back in 2003, in the very first version of a manual, we didn't necessarily, it was part of a criteria, but it was not rated separately, natural resource management. 2009, the second version of our, the first evaluation manual, if you will, a proper evaluation manual that we had, it was a separate criteria as a part of the impact evaluation, impact domain, and it was rated. It was given a rating of, on a scale of 1 to 6. Then the most recent policy, I think there was a recognition, given everything that I've spoken about before, it was seen as a separate performance criteria which was taken out of the poverty impact domain, and it was combined, it was seen in the same legion as, as climate change. So it was, seen along the same lines. And the kind of questions which are asked as a part of this have also changed. Now, you don't have to go through this again, but this is just to say that the number of questions, the scope of questions that we asked over a period of time have also evolved. They have become, now they also incorporate, these are guiding questions, but it mainstreams domains, around sustainability, around gender, around access, climate change, resilience. So there has been quite a bit of evolution as well. Now, I've spoken about all these institutional characteristics and how we started back in 2003, and we have come so far. What has been the result of all of this? We, over a period of time, because we have conducted so many evaluations with some or the other degree of, inclusion of NRM and climate change now, we are sitting on a wealth of knowledge and ratings on this particular criteria. So what are we able to do as a result of that? We are able to show the institutional performance on this particular domain, and environment and natural resource management, and now climate change as well, of course. But this is not all. I think as a result of this accumulated knowledge, we also produced a synthesis of all the knowledge that we have had so far on natural resource management, and we created a synthesis report which was released in 2016. And in 2020, we will be undertaking a thematic evaluation on climate change adaptation. And thematic evaluation is by far the biggest product that we'll have next year. So in that sense, it is, you can see that along with the institutional ambition, we are also trying to meet that ambition that the institution has. So this is more or less what has transpired so far. Now, briefly coming to the methods. How am I doing on time? Is it? Okay. So historically, what are the methods that we have depended on? You see, historically, we have depended on self-evaluation systems, mostly qualitative in nature. We would validate, go into the field, validate, do interviews, observations, focus group discussions with target communities. Usually, when you want to evaluate environment and natural resource management, you would use access-based indicators. You would say, are you able to do this? Do you have land title? How are you managing it? Et cetera, et cetera. So this would be a very household-specific validation, let's just say. However, given the increasing recognition that it has had over a period of time, and given that we are now talking about climate change adaptation as well, you need not just a household level assessment, but rather a watershed level assessment, or even wider in some cases. So I think in that sense, we've also felt the need to evolve over, like our methods that we are using alongside the ones we're already using. And that's why we started using remote sensing in our work. The first such instance, I believe, was in Georgia, alongside an impact evaluation that we did, where we used it to calculate NDVI. And we did it at 2 stages, actually. One, we used it for site selection to select control sites. It was a small irrigation sub-component of the project. And we used it also to select the sites we want to see, which are part of the program intervention. And then subsequently, we used it as a part of country strategy and program evaluation in Mexico. We also used it in Nepal very recently. I'll show you. It's a very simple operation, but still, it helped us a bit. And now we are currently going to use it in a natural resource management program in Ethiopia as a part of an impact evaluation. So you see these methods are now being slowly mainstreamed as a part of different kinds of products. So this is, and we are still trying to grappling with what kind of indicators we want to measure. We can measure rather using these, remote sensing and GIS, but nevertheless, we are making the attempt. Now, as an example, in Nepal, we were there. We said, okay, well, this Nepal is an ecologically sensitive, there's quite a bit of ecological hotspots, if you will, and NRM is a very, important subject in that topic in that country and as a part of IFAD portfolio. So we wanted to see what is it that happened over a period of time. And, we took out some sites and we did, we geotagged, we took pictures, and we started looking at different sites. And what we started, when we were in the field, we were getting a mixed review of what has been the results of some of the leasehold forestry sites that we had, and what is the effect of some of the cattle that the project was financed, small livestock that the project was financing, for the target groups. And we got a mixed review. Now, we took the satellite images and we kind of confirmed the same. So you could see in some cases, you would see a kind of degradation of some of the sites. In some cases, there was an improvement. In some cases, there was nothing. Similarly, in Georgia, we found that there was marginal improvement in the, if you take NDVI as a proxy, then there was marginal improvement in the sites where the project intervened. So these are some of the things that we have done so far. Now, what are some of the constraints? Some of the constraints that we face as an evaluation office in using these new methods is, first, that there's limited expertise in-house. And as a result of that, we are forced to sometimes use external expertise. That is one. Second is that the transaction and opportunity costs of using something like this are quite high, in the sense that if I'm using my time engaging in getting this on board, I'm not spending that time doing something else. So there's an opportunity cost there as well. Third, I think this is quite an underlooked area in our case, is that there's a lack of certain mainstreaming of technology, or even these methods, usage of these methods in the operational departments. For example, if there's no geotagging of the sites that we work in, we are not going to be able to properly, use remote sensing in our work. So to that extent, we are then forced to take on the responsibility of the work that should have been done before. And fourth, I think if they're not accompanied by focused field visits, it may help you answer the what question, what changed rather, or what didn't change, but what it doesn't do is it doesn't help you answer the why. it did change or did not change. That is why it is still very, very important to complement these new methods with our traditional methods, as old-fashioned as they may sound, but they're still very, very pertinent to answer certain questions and to establish the attribution. So conclusions, I think IFAD and IOE's understanding in this field has evolved, and we are still engaging, and so has the nature of interventions. And I think we are slowly moving away from looking at it just as an ENRM, NRM as a standalone field, to looking at it more comprehensively. We spoke so much about complexity. So, when we talk about it, I think this is recognition of complexity even before we knew of the word complexity. So, in the context of resilience and climate change, this evolution calls for newer methods beyond the usual ones that we have already adopted or that we have historically used. And IOE, while it has been using what it can, within the resources it has, we are using newer methods. However, I think it would still be very open to learning from others and what they have done and what we can do better. So, thank you. I believe I've finished in time.
Excellent. Thank you, Prashant. We've got 2 minutes for just questions for clarification. So if something is, oh, there's one hand, okay. 2. I'll take concise in your questions.
Hi, I'm Stephen Lamb. I'm a student from Canada, and I'm really interested in your talk because I'm interested in exploring how UN agencies are considering climate change and evaluation. And from my research, it seems like IFAD is the first one and only one so far to have a mandatory evaluation criteria for adaptation. So I'm wondering, what is your experiences implementing this criteria? Is it working well? And what happens if a program doesn't have an explicit adaptation objective? Like, should it still be assessed? Thank you.
All right, I would suggest that you write that question down, because that's more for the discussion, not so much for clarification, because it would be a shame to just answer really briefly.
Mine is, the first part is clarificatory. So Prashant, thank you so much for the presentation. I enjoyed it. Could you clarify that you said that management currently uses geospatial or disaggregated data to understand how to target and how to locate programs, and then you use the same data to also understand whether the project is working?
No. We used it in some instances to understand where we should go and what are the sites we should be visiting, for example. So, in some cases, they would give us an indication. In Georgia, for example, we used it to do site selection for a counterfactual analysis. That was the basic thing. So, because I think for us, the controlling variables were the landscape, the proximity to water bodies, and also in some cases, it was also the roads, for example, so depending on how much human movement there is in that area. So it really was a combination of these, to isolate, these controlling, to control for certain factors, if you will. So that is how we selected the counterfactual sites. It is not the management which did it. In fact, that is one of the things that I say in the end, that the lack of mainstreaming rather into the operations, that is, I think, one of the things which is not happening. However, promisingly enough, I think one of the regional divisions is now making it mandatory to geotag all their sites. So, there's hope for the future.
Yeah, there's a lot of hope. Okay, thank you, Prashant. Have a seat. So, esteemed colleagues, next you've got 2 for the price of 1. I'm glad to introduce 2 very seasoned evaluators, Andrew and Garrett. If you may come up here, please. Both work at the ADB. They're principal and senior evaluation specialist, respectively. Andrew has been working on lots of evaluations notably in agriculture, natural resource management, and both of them will also share sort of a similar organizational journey, looking at sort of what kind of methods you can use and the use of innovative methods. So let me just...
Perfect. That's great. Thank you, Sven, and thank you, Prashant. I really appreciate your presentation. In many ways, this idea of a journey is probably a good term to use for what we've gone through. And I really appreciate the IFAD. Their journey is probably a little more structured than our journey. Maybe it's because we're from ADB. Does everybody know that? Asian Development Bank, otherwise known as Asia's dams and bridges. We build a lot of things, which has implications for how we look at things like climate and environments. And so we can get into some of those things. And maybe because we're on an island and we're on island time, we're a little slower than some of the other colleagues to come to try to address some of these issues. But Gerrit and I work together on quite a few of our higher level evaluations, often in this space of natural resources, environment, agriculture. And so slowly we've been thinking about or recognizing that we should be thinking more broadly about environment, complexity, systems. And although we may not be there yet, we've at least started to think about these things. And so we wanted to share that experience. So in many ways, this session is like, I don't know if anybody's ever been to a car show. This is like a car show. And right now you're at the homemade cars, where we're new to this and we're experimenting with what to do. And we've got a kit car we want to show you how we're dealing with it. And then later on, you're going to get to the Mercedes and I think the Ferrari. So the good stuff is coming. So first of all, what do I mean? Let me give you a little bit of background just about...
Oh, maybe?
Oh, there we go. Just who we are. Okay. So basically, we are, like many of the institutions, we are independent. We answer directly to a committee of the board. But one thing I wanted to point out here is we have two divisions. One is called thematic kind of corporate and country evaluations, and the other is sector and project. Now, why is that important? It's because we come out of this kind of classical idea of how we would evaluate or what we would do. And the idea is we spend most of our resources at the bottom here working on projects, and then those projects are in things like sectors, energy sector, power generation, transmission lines, or road sector, transportation, water, agriculture, and so on. And the idea is that you basically can just sum these things up linearly, and that's all you need to do. So it was sectors and projects is one division, and it's almost separate is this other focus on what they call the higher level evaluations. And that's where Gerrit and I want to work. And what we've been finding in a series of these evaluations that we've been doing at the corporate, thematic, or country level, what we find is when you start to think about what you should be doing or what we should be asking, the answers don't come from this bottom-up aggregation. Whether we're talking about these things of complexity, transformation, these other issues. So we're trying to think how can we actually step up what we're doing? And that's what we want to share with you today, our experience with that. Just in terms of the challenges, this whole conference has been talking about a lot of these. I only want to focus on the second one here, and that is that basically, because we do this objectives-based evaluation around the DAC criteria, the REIS criteria, because most of our projects are related to this infrastructure development, the primary objective is not related to environment. It's about economic growth. It's about poverty reduction. So these things are not captured well often in the results framework if we look too narrowly at what we want to do. And yet we know these things like environment, climate change are becoming more and more important. At best, these institutions look to do no harm in these areas, and that's a big deal to say we don't want to harm the environment. But the environmental do good factor is a huge black box, and that's something we really struggle with. So just a few things that we've been trying to do. With these higher level evaluations, just to give you an idea of what we do, the methodologies are almost uniform. First of all, we go through a large amount of portfolio data. We have data about the projects, about the approval documents, about M&E. We have then our own project evaluations. So we've got a lot of documents that we can go through. And we're getting better about how to use those. We also are drawing more and more on secondary data to try to reinforce new aspects. And then we're drawing back on some more other disciplines that are more traditional, whether statistical analysis or cost benefit, to kind of layer these in. And then finally, as with IFAD, we're experimenting a bit with, with remote sensing. So quickly, just on the secondary data we've tried, I mean, there's a lot of talk here about evidence gap maps, some of these activities. And what we found when we tried to use some of these things, we underestimate the time, and often our products, they come late. So they haven't been useful. So what we've done instead is just we've done literature reviews up front that are quite robust to try to bring out issues or highlight other alternative pathways that we might want to consider in the evaluation. And this contributes to our theory of change or areas or hypotheses that we want to investigate. And this one example is from natural disasters. And the institution had primarily focused on reconstruction afterwards, but because Asia is the most prone region to natural disasters, with 7 of the 10 most affected countries, we really started the evaluation actually helped the institution think about how to think differently and move upstream, doing more ex-ante work on disaster prevention, mitigation, et cetera. Here, just on the portfolio review, we've been doing a lot of trying to code our portfolio data much better. This is a more traditional source, but in this case, the institution has said that it roughly has 60% of its of the portfolio is environmental, and what we did was we actually looked at that, and we set up some criteria, and we basically concluded that only 1/3 of the portfolio is actually contributing to the environment. And we did this one by hand, but we're starting to use some qualitative software now, like MaxQDA, to do this in more recent evaluations. The other thing we do then is we take this information. Our institution is very interested in comparisons. So in this case, our 2 biggest countries are India and China. And the dark green is the amount of the portfolio that's was tagged environmental in China compared to India. And India is much more representative of our overall portfolio in ADB. And you'll see China is a real outlier. So that was quite interesting for us. So, but it's just a basic comparison, but it was quite telling. And then in our country evaluation, we actually unpacked the China example a bit more. And what we found over time is that in each of the main sectors, energy, transport, and urban, the portfolio has clearly shifted over time. And then we combine that with for information sources with a heat map of air pollution over time. And what you see is China's air is actually getting cleaner over that time period, and in South Asia, it's actually becoming more polluted. So although it's not causation, but at least it was part of it was consistent with our storyline. And now with that, Garrett's going to talk a bit more about some of the specifics where we've actually tried to link project work with these higher level evaluations.
Thanks, Andrew. And maybe to follow on the car analogy, we haven't yet reached the Mercedes. I'd say maybe a Lada or maybe a Skoda for this location. So I'm going to take it a little bit further, dig a little bit deeper at the project level. 3 examples, only 4 slides to go. These are some projects that were part of our country case studies, where we tried to use the information, using these methodologies to inform our higher level evaluation. These 2 case studies are for our higher level evaluation on ADB support for agriculture, natural resources, and rural development. These 2 projects were ones that we had already evaluated. We wanted to look and pilot the use of remote sensing in projects that we had already evaluated using the standard evaluative techniques, focus group discussions, or field visits, document review, household surveys. In this particular case, actually it was a co-finance project with IFAD and ADB, with ADB carrying out most of the infrastructure development on, for example, these tail end gates and irrigation infrastructure. And IFAD was supporting the on-farm support, extension services, adoption of high-yielding varieties of rice. And the map here you can see on the right, this is the command area that we were looking at. This is, we used NDVI as a proxy for crop yield. So these are the annual values at before the project and then after. And then we had quite good crop calendar data, so we were able to look at just pre-harvest NDVI to look at the progress in those yields. So the yields, the relative difference between pre-project and post-project was similar to what we were getting in our focus group discussions and in the published data in terms of crop yields with the farmers. The other benefit of this, so it gives us a sense of the achievement, but also the time lag that it took to actually achieve that, which we would not normally get from traditional methods. This was the project that was evaluated, and there's a follow-on project. So this kind of data also helps us in terms of looking at baselines, how baselines shift over time. The second example, it's kind of fortuitous. We have two examples which are partnered with our fellow presenters. This one was co-financed between ADB and Jeff, Sanjiang Plain in China, very important wetlands for migratory birds. I carried out the project performance evaluation for this project in 2015, and we revisited as part of the higher level evaluation using remote sensing. This photograph here is, I mean, I was standing here, so you come to the site. We're looking at 6 project wetlands spread across 100 kilometers across the northeast China. So, you know, if you're standing there, you see the wetland, it looks pretty good, but how do we really know how extensive that progress has been? So we used, again, Landsat data, and we looked at land cover change. The results were quite surprising in that, I mean, they're very flat. The results allowed us to put into perspective the extent and level of ambition of the project. As you can see, the blue line here is the wetland, which is quite flat. We were able to confirm that in the core zone here, the dark shaded area, there was no longer any farming going on. But this green line here is agriculture, which is continuing in the buffer zone and in the experimental area. So it gave us a sense of the level of ambition that the project was able to achieve, which would have been difficult to gauge without remote sensing. The next sample, just briefly, it's of course we typically do cost-benefit analysis in all our projects, but we focus on the economic benefits. And where environment benefits are mentioned, it's usually in narrative form and they're not quantified. But for this higher level evaluation that we did a couple of years ago on safeguards, we did a project example in a road project in Sri Lanka. And I mean, this is just a schematic of what we were expecting. So we expect, you know, with safeguards benefits to obviously increase, and without not. This blue dotted line is slightly controversial. This is a hypothetical country case study, country safeguard systems. But we were able to carry out the cost-benefit analysis. But one of our findings was that, you know, typically when we do these kind of projects, we don't collect enough data in the field to support this kind of analysis on environment, and we need to do more of that. So just some conclusions then. So as Andrew said, we will continue to use our standard methodologies and triangulation for these thematic, these higher level evaluations. And they need to be robust, and we can use them for the environment. But these new technologies, these new data analysis tools, we can use them to reinforce and to improve our triangulation and improve the weight of evidence. But we obviously need to do it in a cost-effective way But we are seeing that there are lots of opportunities where it can actually increase the efficiency of how we do our evaluations. And then related to this conference and to this, the themes that are being discussed, it also, we can see this being more useful when we look at shifting baselines in terms of land use change and climate influence. So, I mean, this weekend I will go to Uzbekistan for a project level evaluation, and actually I'm ditching the international consultant because we're going to use that money to do some remote sensing. You may think the MDBs are totally flush with money for these project evaluations, but we're quite limited actually how we do it. So we have to be quite judicious and strategic on how we use this kind of technology. So use it where it adds value and improves our weight of evidence and the confidence in our lessons and our learning. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Garrett. Andrew, you want to take a seat? Questions for clarification from anyone? Oh, there at the back.
Thanks very much. My name is Simone Vaccari. I'm from LTS International, and my interest is in Earth observation and remote sensing, so my question is around that. I got a couple of ones, actually. The first one, on the NDVI, I was wondering how did you take the seasonality into effect on your analysis, whether you did like a yearly average or did you take like specific time of the year, the NDVI calculations? And the second one on the wetland restorations, did you try to use radar data as well for mapping, which could be quite useful for wetland mapping? I was wondering, thanks.
Okay, thanks. Any other question for clarification so far? Oh.
Thanks, and just to add to that, Garrett, as you answer that question, can you talk a little bit about the cost of remote sensing, and as you're ditching your international consultant? Thanks.
Yeah, bad news for international consultants. Okay.
Shall I? Yes. Okay. Yeah, just very briefly. So, in terms of NDVI, we were able to get good cropping calendars for the various crops that we were tracking, this Amman and Boro rice. But as you probably know, we were using Landsat, so we got about 9 or 10 time slices across each year that we're looking at. And you know, when we rule out cloud cover and issues like that, or in the case of Heilongjiang, ice or snow cover. So we had about 9 observations each year, and we tried to track peak NDVI just before harvest time for aligning with the cropping calendar. We haven't used radar, but we know we've seen examples of that, so that is a good suggestion. On cost, the issue here is it's a question of who you get to do the work. If the actual basic GIS work is not so sophisticated, but it's quite labor intensive, we tend to use local consultants in the Philippines for most of that work. Where we might get some help is maybe develop, if we have more sophisticated TOR that we need help on, that we would seek more work. But I mean, I don't know if you're looking for a number. I mean, yeah, roughly to do this kind of work that we did for both these projects, it was about $10,000. Significant difference if you use international. Yeah, I mean, a multiple if you use international.
Okay, thanks. We'll have more time for discussion later on, but now I'm really excited to introduce Anupam. He's going to talk now about the experience of Jeff. So we had IFAD, ADB, and now Jeff. Anupam works as evaluation officer at Jeff. He is actually a remote sensing specialist, worked a lot on land degradation as well. And what's really cool about Anupam, actually, we should chat over beer. So he's not only flying drones, you know, in his private life, but he's also a professional pilot. So he's combining remote sensing. Well, for me, that's sort of the same. But so he's combining remote sensing expertise with, you know, the flying work. So that's pretty exciting. So there you go.
Okay, thank you, Sven, for the introduction. And thank you, Prashant, Andrew, and Garrett. I think you made my work easy. So this is not going to be a journey. This is going to be a whistle-stop tour. And this is kind of a professional as well as personal journey for me as well. So the first question is, why do we need geospatial methods and remote sensing for evaluation? First of all, it's efficient. So it costs you less money, less human resources, and less lives, because you can use this in hard-to-reach, fragile, and conflict areas as well. It enables analysis at scale. And we heard about complexity and how scale issues are a big part of the complexity discussion, scale, difference in time scale, spatial scale, processes. Also, it aids objectivity and transparency, because this is an objective evidence, and therefore, it's helping you with this. Also, it's applicable to a variety of evaluation methods, and I'll show you some examples how it can work with traditional evaluation methods. And it helps us deal with methodological challenges, such as lack of baseline or lack of counterfactual. Also, the output or the outcome of this analysis is visually very easy to interpret. So it helps you in your outreach, communication, knowledge management as well. Okay, this is a big one, that you do not have to depend on your international organization partners to tell you that you are growing. You have the ownership on your own data. This is reproducible, replicable, so this is very important. Now we talked about SDG and how 169 targets and 230 odd indicators are going to make evaluation complex. Now there are at least 9 goals that are remotely sensible, and that, no pun intended. There are indicators mapped to these goals where it's already been used, and we are using some of it in our work. So in next few minutes, I will just speak evaluators' language, and I'll show you how we have used it to answer question on relevance, effectiveness, impact, sustainability, and even beyond that. So we're not just sticking to the DEC criteria. Biodiversity. So Jeff works on, as a mandate, Jeff works on biodiversity conservation. So these are the protected areas that we were able to locate. Now this is quite frustrating that we do not know where these projects are located. But we transform this challenge into an opportunity by making it a recommendation that we need to know where we are working. And now it's a requirement in Jeff 7 that location information is mandatory from the project side. So now here we wanted to ask the relevance question, that are we intervening in the right place? And these are protected areas. So you would like to put the protected areas where you need protection. There are important species, there is biodiversity, or the biodiversity is threatened. So what we did here, we just overlaid the protected areas with the evaluation, with the layers of significant biodiversity presence, and that tells us whether these areas are important from biodiversity perspective or not. And here's the result. 58% of these protected areas were key biodiversity areas. The rest of them were important from international perspective, could be Ramsar site, could be UN heritage sites, and 11% were important from a national perspective. So this tells you that indeed, Jeff protected areas are placed in relevant areas. Now, there's another policy implication of this simple analysis. It just takes a couple of hours, and most of the time is spent making this beautiful map. Now, the policy implication was that now it's a criteria in Jeff to use KBAs for protected area projects. So you see, a simple analysis can have policy implication. Now what we did, I mean, that's the first good step, that if you know where Jeff is intervening and it's relevant, now what's happening there? Relevance itself is not enough. So what we did, we looked at all these forested protected areas, and we looked what's happening or what happened during the project duration and before and after. So this is just one example that you have the core of the protected area. So you compare the forest loss during the project duration, after, but also with outside the areas of protection and with the area of protection. So we did this. You can see the results that area inside the protected area is experiencing much less forest loss here compared to the areas which are outside. So this could be used as a control, and we use difference and difference method here. Now, here's the results, and we did it for 35,000 protected areas. So we are talking about big data, trillions of data points, and you see that the protection is better in the GEF-supported protected areas, much less compared to the non-GEF protected areas. But we still, although we can control for bioregion and control for the kind of protected area, the country and all that, this doesn't still tell us about attribution. And as an evaluator, we always look for attribution. So what we did, we used quasi-experimental design, so we used matching analysis in Mexico. We couldn't do this for the entire globe. It's very challenging. We don't have the infrastructure and the time and the resources to do that at that point in time. But Mexico, we had a good data set, and it was manageable. And we did this matching analysis, and the results demonstrated that there were less forest loss within the GEF-supported protected areas in Mexico. Now, so this answers your impact question. We applied similar principle in Lake Victoria. It has a water hyacinth problem. So we didn't have baseline. And there were 3 back-to-back, almost back-to-back GF intervention. So these are the baseline. I mean, you see that not much has changed in 90s. And then in 2007, if you see here, the area which is lit up demonstrates the presence of vegetation. And then after projects, and there are other projects, the trends have started going down. So you can even look beyond project period, and you can deal with the challenges of lack of baseline here. And you can assess the sustainability of the outcome. Here's another example, not a good one, but if you're familiar with this area, Cardamom Mountain in Cambodia, you see that the project ends here, and then the floodgates are open. You see areas inside protected area, outside the country, everything is going southwards. So here you can do all this, and you can answer the question on sustainability using remote sensing. And I mean, it's a trivial statement, but with this example, it also kind of proves that the difference between monitoring and evaluation is just a line here. So and this is a challenging. I mean, assessing sustainability is challenging, but with this, at least you get a sense of what's happening after the project is closed. Now, how do we bring it all together? All these examples were just focused on remote sensing application. So here what we did, we use in a triangulation frameworks. So not only to validate, but also to get additional information that we would not get otherwise. So here is a bamboo forest, you see, and this is the best way. I have hugged so many trees in my previous life. So I know this gives you the best data. But imagine this and this is just a small patch. This is bamboo restoration project here. I mean, you cannot measure all the trees here. So what we did, we used remote sensing, again, NDVI, which is a proxy for vegetation health. And you see this area was restored, but we do not know why. So why question was still missing. So we did some further analysis there. I think the animation doesn't show up. But we went into the field and we figured out that the change in the land tenure law there led to this. Another example, this is in Colombia. So this is a silvopastoral system. So this is a pastoral area, and these are the beneficiary, 2 women, and they have 5,000 cows. and the idea was to plant trees in their pasture. So we validated that. We discussed how did this happen, what kind of support they got, and we also have the data. So it's not just a visual tool. It answers Joe's question on how much. So how much has vegetation increased? So you can quantify that as well. A similar example that my colleague Carlo is working on. So what we did, went into the field and collected the geographical information with the app. So we have the GPS tags, which was sent to me. And you can see the restoration that has happened around this lake, which feeds the Senegal River. And you see the changes. But we also quantify the changes. And you can also look at the precipitation trend and how vegetation is responding to it. So this is another example. And what we also do here is we use remote sensing to select the project sites. So where should we visit? And so we identify the hotspots, because when we are visiting the field, sometimes it's very elitist. People spend years and 2 years figuring out a protected area, and we go there for a week or two or even less. And if we are not aware of the context, how do we ask the right question? You go to an area and you figure everything is really fine. You go to the other side, and the guy is telling, I will cut forest because my cousin who is at the entrance of the protected area, he's making money. Here there are no tourists. So you are more context aware, and you can ask better questions when you have access to this. We also run it through the stakeholders, the beneficiaries, and ask them to explain why do we see this trend, where we see this. I mean, apart from just validating, we ask them. And so this is more powerful, and it gives us better evidence. Now, I heard Prashant mention that we cannot answer the question on why. Sometimes we can. So here is an example. This is Rio Lagartos in Mexico. They have beautiful flamingos here. If you go there, I mean, this is a little off-road, and you might not be able to see what's the main driver of forest loss or environmental degradation. But with high resolution, this is the free available data. With high resolution, actually, you can count the number of cows. So this is illegal cattle ranching happening there. So you can figure out what's the main driver. If you see this missing in your project document, in the theory of change, you can go back and update it. Okay, so now I'll just briefly talk about the challenges in mainstreaming geospatial methods and remote sensing. First, this is quite still new to the evaluation processes and disciplines. So you have to make a business case. You have to take baby steps. You start with a site level analysis and start moving towards the portfolio level analysis. Also, you need to manage costs. There are different ways of managing cost, because sometimes it can go out of hands. The traditional evaluation, TORs and all that, they are not, there are so many moving parts that they are not aware of what would it need to complete a particular study. Also, it requires good technical skills. So either you have to have in-house or outside your organization. Also, it requires multidisciplinary team for evaluation. So a remote sensing person might have a computer science background, very less information on ecology or the social side of things, on the evaluation side of things. So you have to, this needs an interdisciplinary team. Also, every day you have a new satellite, new algorithm coming up, so you have to catch up. So this is a dynamic learning process, just like evaluation. We are coming up with new methods, and every other conference I hear a few new evaluation approaches, with some with TM, some without TM. So what's the lesson for the future? So few of the lessons we have learned is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Partner with global institutions who produce some of these data sets. So we have collaborated with NASA, with the University of Maryland, and they are very eager to help you. Also leverage open data and tools. There are many data sets and tools that are openly available, open source. You don't have to invest much. Of course, like any method, geospatial method is not a silver bullet. It needs to be leveraged in a mixed approach framework. Also cost. So I get asked this question all the time. So cost depends on the type of evaluation question you're asking, the scope of evaluation, local, global, what kind of data, what kind of skills you have in-house, what kind of skills you need from outside, and what kind of software do you need, what kind of partnership you have. So the costs are variable. So here are some resources that I've listed, and I think you're going to hear about the Global Forest Watch, and there's some others that this list is not comprehensive, but it's a good starting point. With that, I will thank you for your attention.
Great. Thank you, Anupam. That was really exciting. Any questions for clarification? Well, that was quick.
Thank you for this interesting presentation. I have a question. Actually, I'm coming from the social science perspective, and I was wondering if what kind of hotspots have you been using? Just only this biodiversity, or have you been maybe also trying to model with some kind of socioeconomic indicators to combine to check whether they are covering the same area and so on? Thank you. Ah, sorry. Okay, my name is Anna Augustin. I am a consultant.
Thank you. And there was another.
Hi, so I'm Simona Varga from Czech NGO People in Need. I was wondering, coming back to your example from Cambodia, if you have any information about like how was the community involved in this project? What kind of, I don't know, governance structures were put in place after the end of the project? Because that data is really striking and it happens over and over again. So I wonder if you have any information about that. Thank you.
Okay, so Anna, the answer to your question is that yes, we have used nightlights, for example, to see whether there has been a trade-off between environmental growth. So if you see increase in vegetation and increase in, say, forest growth, at the same time you see increase in nightlight, that means it's probably good for both. But this can be used for other areas also, for adaptation, for example. You can look into the areas of high risk and whether your project are targeted there or not. So that's a good relevance question. And the Cambodia, actually, so there was community engagement in this, in the projects we had there. But the problem there is, and if you are aware, it's illegal logging. It's a big one. Actually, one of the rangers working there was killed last year. So this is a very difficult area to work and a big area, but there are now follow-up projects in that area. So of course, the community is part of the community living around and in that area. They are engaged and they are being provided alternative livelihood, but it's not the community who's doing it. This is at an international scale. I don't want to name countries or parties responsible, but the situation is really bad. Okay, thank you for your questions, and over to Sven.
Okay, so at the end we still have time for discussion, but for now I have the pleasure to introduce to you Catherine Scheer. She's working at the World Research Institute on a very important topic, I guess, for all of us. You see the Global Forest Watch. Catherine is a monitoring and evaluation officer there, and part of your work is also on communication. So I'm pretty excited about your slides. I think that for us a great lesson how we can actually effectively communicate. And prior to joining, you worked at the World Food Program in Ecuador and in Indonesia. So with further detail.
Thank you so much, Sven, and thanks to all of the previous presenters. You really gave me like the perfect setup there, Anupam, so if I don't, spike it in, it's going to be disappointing. Okay, so I'm going to make this really easy on all of you. There are only 2 things that you need to remember from my presentation. So here is the first one. This is Global Forest Watch, and it is a platform that you can use for free to do some of the evaluation techniques that all of these presenters have already explained to you. Forward, right? Yeah, okay, thanks. Oh, first, so show of hands, who has ever heard of Global Forest Watch? Who has used it? Well, it's not bad. But that's not that many of you, so let me quickly explain what Global Forest Watch is. Most of us are familiar with the devastating statistics on deforestation. But one of the things that we don't always realize is that those statistics are more like educated guesses, at least they were until very recently. Until recently, we didn't have any way to systematically monitor such a vast and remote natural resource on a global scale. So some of my brilliant colleagues at WRI decided that that was an issue, especially if you want to stop it. And so they partnered with some of the leading universities in the world, tech firms in Silicon Valley. So we work with University of Maryland, Google, to bring together the latest advances in technology like cloud computing, artificial intelligence, and remote sensing to bring forest monitoring into the 21st century. Is it working? So now, when a tree falls in the forest, it shows up as a pink pixel on Global Forest Watch, which anybody anywhere in the world can see, as long as they have access to the internet. And you can see at this level of granularity, which each of those dots is 30 by 30 meters. That, I should say, is logging road snaking its way through the Amazon on Global Forest Watch. You can also see whether that logging road is working its way through a national park, which hint it is, or you can overlay it with other contextual data like palm oil concessions in Papua New Guinea to see if this industrial scale agriculture is happening within a legal concession. Hint, it's not. So then we partnered with groups like this around the world who need this type of data to do their work. So this is Betty Padilla. She and her community of about 40 families own collective title to about 20,000 hectares of pristine Amazon rainforest. So they use this data to go out and patrol their area. They receive those alerts via email, use a mobile application to go find them and work with law enforcement to intercede in that deforestation before it spreads. Leonardo is a police chief in Amapá, Brazil, who uses it along with his team of 12 to monitor an area about the size of Nepal. And they have increased the number of arrests thanks to this technology. In Uganda, the government is working with the Jane Goodall Institute for the protected areas that are home to chimpanzees and gorillas, also to intercede in deforestation before it spreads. So okay, so you get the idea of who's using it. So that's really, though, just the tip of the iceberg of more than 2.5 million people who have accessed the platform over the past 5 years and are collectively using it to monitor more than 600 million hectares of forest. Great, sounds like a successful project, right? But not so fast. And this is where the evaluation part comes in. So this is the second thing that I want you to remember from this presentation. We want to know whether this is making an impact. So this technology is available, but given the urgency of deforestation, we have a responsibility to make sure that we are achieving the greatest impact, that we are spending the limited resources available on this topic to really have the biggest impact and to adjust our programs so that it is as effective as possible. So we are conducting an evaluation to do just that. This is where the mixed methods part comes in. So let me focus a little bit on the quantitative methods that we are using. This is some pretty big data stuff. So we have talked in this throughout this conference about the need for a counterfactual, and of course it's really difficult to have a counterfactual when you're working on a big data platform like this that anybody in the world can access. So so we are using 3 different methods to try to do that. The first is we are benefiting from the staggered rollout of GLAD alerts. It was first available just in that subset of countries. We expanded it to all of the tropics. So we are comparing across countries where GLAD alerts were and were not yet available to see changes in deforestation trends. The second is that, as I mentioned, you can subscribe to any area that you want. That means that you would see that deforestation, you would receive an email alert about it if it happened within the area that you had subscribed to. So we have data about who those subscribers are, and we are looking at deforestation trends within areas that have more subscriptions to them to see if that makes a difference. But of course that has classic simultaneity bias because of course people are subscribing to areas where forests are at greater risk, right? So we have this really cool instrumental variable analysis. So satellite passes over. Sometimes there are clouds in the way. Clouds are pretty random. Not that random, but not correlated to deforestation. We know, and this is where the big data part comes in, we know for every pixel whether or not it was blocked by a cloud and whether the satellite was able to take an image of that place. So we know whether, regardless of whether deforestation happened, a user received an alert about that place that they had subscribed to. And so we can instrument the model of users and deforestation by cloud cover. So this is the analysis that we're currently conducting, and I just wanted to throw in that we are pairing it with these qualitative methods that, like Anupam was talking about, we really want to know the why, because we really, I'm embedded within WRI, and I want to know in real time also, we like real time, what needs to be done about, to make these programs more effective. So if it's not working, why? What are the structural barriers in people's way? Where does corruption play a role or not? What are the incentive structures that make it too difficult for people to stop deforestation, et cetera? So we are conducting these case studies in 3 countries and excited to release those results soon. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent, many thanks. Also, before we start the discussion, questions for clarification for Catherine, and if I may ask all the panelists to sit up front. Wow, okay, so it was all crystal clear, so no questions for clarification for you. So we've got about 25 minutes left until the coffee break, so some good time for discussion. I see already the first hand, but for the discussion I would really like you to ask to think about in terms of your comments, sort of what experience you have of integrating new methods in your standard way of doing evaluations. What kind of challenges are you facing to do this, and sort of ask the panelists also about their experience, because from my point of view, what sort of emerges as a storyline is that some of you said it. It's not a silver bullet that solves all of our problems. There's some questions that can be asked. Some others we still need to do some other work. Also, the point of triangulation, still doing other kind of work, interviews and qualitative work is still an important tool. So please, if you in your comments and questions could reflect on sort of the challenges and opportunities that you see with regards to the new data.
Solomon from Green Climate Fund Independent Evaluation Unit. I have a couple of questions, but I'll only pick two. With respect to, we have discussed a lot about how to use geospatial data for impact, for evaluation generally. And there is a traditional way of doing evaluation using socioeconomics data and counterfactual framework and so on. I'm wondering how can one do much more a rigorous way of evaluation, combining both geospatial and socioeconomics, not the way it was explained here, but a little bit one step forwards to do that. That would help us a lot in terms of especially to understand the distributional impact. Using geospatial alone doesn't tell us the impact on a given segment of population within the income quantile distribution or so. The second question I have is for you using this cloud movement as an instrumental variable. I think that's very fascinating, but I'm wondering whether there is no correlation between how cloud movements and the presence of forest generally, because you would observe microclimates that is a functional of the vegetation cover and so on. Do you guys do any sort of testing, how strong your instrument is? If you could comment on that, thank you.
So I'm Jo, and I work at the Independent Evaluation Unit of the Green Climate Fund, and Solomon and I are not trying to take over the discussion space here, but we just want, I have several questions. On the ESG data that you presented, Andrew, was that was that your office looking at environmental and social gains, or was that safeguards and risks and mitigation? And if you could talk a little bit about that. And then, Anupam, well, first I should have said I loved all your presentations. Anupam, on your 13 SDGs that are remote sensible, actually the 14th is also no poverty. The first one, yeah, but of those, you said 13 were remote sensible.
9 of them were remotely sensible.
I see, okay, so 10, because even the first one, you can get poverty disaggregated data now using different indicators or proxies for poverty. And actually, the World Bank has done really interesting work, and I don't know whether you'd looked at it, so I thought I could ask you your comments on it. And my last question was, yeah, back again on costs. This time not asking all of you to think about numbers, although of course I'd be interested, but thinking about access to this kind of data. And Catherine, you touched upon it a little bit, but if you could talk a little bit about getting access to this kind of data and what the challenges are and the privacy concerns as well.
Yeah, so this is coming from ESA. So this is not my analysis, but we have also used some of the proxy for poverty and socioeconomic, but it works in some areas, it doesn't work in some area. Night lights, for example, the signal to noise ratio in some of the rural areas is so low that you cannot use that data at a macro level. So at a, say, census block level, that there are a lot of studies that where it is more effective. But now there's a lot of work in progress where individual indicators are mapped to some of these Earth observation data. For example, SDG 15.3 has 3 indicators: forest loss, land productivity, and soil carbon. So these are remotely sensible, and these are actually coming from, there are some data sets that are being used to set voluntary LDN targets. A lot of countries, I think more than 100 countries are already reporting on the baseline using these data sets. And there are others, SDG 6.11, there's a website also, I think it's SDG 6.11, where the water data, I think it was on my slide, the second link, that's being used for that. It's about water availability.
quick clarification. What about asset data? Given how highly, given the high resolution of this data that you're looking at, and you're looking at cows and all of that, couldn't you use asset, and assets are used to understand poverty?
So I'm aware of a study in, at the World Bank in Sri Lanka where they were able to use that. It's very expensive. These data sets, the high resolution data set is not freely available because they are commercial companies and they need to pay their staff. What we did in our case, we collaborated with NASA because they have access to the 3-letter word agency and the CIA. So through them, we get the data for free, but it's pretty expensive for countries to use it.
So I'm just going to speak to access for a minute. So here's what is available for free using Global Forest Watch and the associated tools. So Global Forest Watch is, I didn't want to go into too much detail, but it is the online platform. You can then use it in a mobile application, which lets you navigate directly to things, the subscription system through that online platform. And then you can build it out into what we call a map builder, which is a product we've designed with Esri. All you need is an Esri user license for that. So what you can access for free through that is all of the Hansen data sets, which is annual tree cover loss, and the GLAD alerts, which is what I was showing, which are 30 by 30 meter weekly tree cover loss alerts. You can also access 200 or more global contextual layers. So those are things like protected areas, high conservation value areas, biodiversity hotspots. We built the first global palm oil concession database, in part because we've been partnering with companies to make that data more publicly available. For anybody who doesn't know us, free and transparent data is foundational to our model. So we try to make everything possible publicly available. You can also access through the site high-resolution satellite images from Planet. You cannot then download those. You can see them, but not download them. So if you were interested in an area, you can go look at it, but then just use it. We are working then on building out those alerts to Sentinel and radar-based satellite data. So we're trying to make sort of the most cutting-edge data available on it.
If I may just add, so we had a pilot project looking at roof cover, at roofing of buildings, which can be an indicator of poverty. And if we buy high-resolution data, we bought high-resolution data for Philippines and parts of Philippines, for parts of Costa Rica, that we developed a model to semi-automatically classify this, but it's not yet scalable. So first of all, also the semi-automatic is semi, very, but big capital letters, semi-automatic, so not so automatic. And also for small countries, you're looking at significant price tags. You know, those are 0.5 meter resolution. So that's high resolution, and that costs you 50,000 for a data set for a small country, 5 to 7 years. So we're not quite there yet. However, you know, the FAO, for instance, they also have what's it called, open forests, I think too. Yeah. So that there are some other open source tools available there, and also with 10-meter resolution you can do quite a lot already. Oh, and then on poverty, there are a couple of publications out there that use mobile phone data and mobile money data as proxy to poverty. So that's something out there as well. Okay, some more, but I shouldn't take. Oh.
Thanks. Just one comment, the GCF colleague, about rigorous geospatial impact evaluation. I mean, obviously, it's clear we're not at that level yet, but maybe you've heard of aid data in the States who have done some very interesting work in Afghanistan on USAID project on roads, who I think is a good one. Just on cost, I mean, there is a solution. There's a kind of a roundabout, so you still have to pay for it, but one thing we're trying to advocate in ADB is that the operations departments would routinely collect this, because it's actually, as you can probably see, it's the perfect M&E tool in many cases where you have spatially based outcome indicators. So then the evaluation units would come in at the end and it'd be more of a validation exercise. That's one option. Yeah.
Just on, Joe, on your comment on when we did the coding and looking at the portfolio, when we were looking at it, we were thinking only from gain, so environmental gain. And so we were coding things like whether or not there were clear things in the objectives and anywhere in the log frame or budget, or if things came up in the midterm review that got coded in. But thinking about that, and now we're actually looking at more of the mitigation through the safeguards evaluation. When you look at the quality of the data there in terms of the quality that our institutions produce, the ex-ante data on through an EIA, and then also what we're doing now is climate risk screening. And then when those are done well, those actually provide tremendous benefit. Or potential benefit about what could be done. And so if those are only going to be used to do mitigation, it's a real lost opportunity. So we're really thinking hard in this evaluation about what we might want to say about that, because it's really potentially transformational, the climate risk screening in particular.
I'll try to answer a few of them. Actually, my presentation was more of an institutional look, and it is deliberately so that I don't, duplicate what others were going to say. So it was a coordinated effort. But just to answer quickly on the experience on evaluating adaptation to climate change, I think adaptation it depends really on what your operations are about. Of course, that's the first thing. But specific to IFAD, you see, we work with rural populations and, rural development, agricultural development, but rural development in general. Now, when you talk about rural development, we're talking about rural livelihoods. Now, adaptation of what? Adaptation of rural populations, of their livelihoods to climate change, the symptoms of climate change, if you will. That's the important part. Now, when you're talking about that, there's two things. You want to promote resilience, right, to these shocks. Resilience of existing livelihood. How can resilience be done? You make existing livelihoods resilient. By, for example, if you're farming, you don't encourage monocropping. You encourage intercropping. You promote conservation agriculture practices so as to account for these irregular rainfall patterns. And promote if you're doing, livestock, promote breeds which are more resilient to climate change and, scarcity of water, etc. So these are existing livelihoods. Or second, if you go a step further, a project should also be looking at diversifying the livelihoods, people away from livelihoods which they're doing to, get income from more sources, if you will. So this is the two-part way of looking at it, specific to our institution. Now, initially, I'll be honest that, if you go through our initial reports, there's a bit more overlap between environment and natural resource management and adaptation, but slowly as evaluators, even that's a part of a learning process that we have, I think, come to, recognize this difference between both of them, and within that, better define what adaptation actually means. That is one. Second thing is about costs. I think this is something which I hadn't mentioned in the slides, but when we did these exercises, for example, someone made a very good point on national, depends on which kind of consultants or which resources are you using. Our experience in Mexico was that we used it for assessing, a project which was on forestry. I believe it cost us $1,500, about that, because we used Mexican, national institutions. So in a country program evaluation, that's a very reasonable amount to have, for one project, and then, you can do specific field visits to verify and validate certain things and then get done with it. For impact evaluations as well, when you spend so much money, for us using it for counterfactual analysis, we spent a similar amount. It helped us select certain sites. so which we thought was money well spent. And similarly in Nepal, we ended up using, I believe we spent about $2,000, a bit over 2,000. Yeah, so Fabrizio probably can, yeah, so about that, I believe it is something around that. It helped us validate what we had already done. The last point is on mainstreaming. I'll just quickly, Sven, with your permission. I think this whole point on mainstreaming, I think, is very important, and this dialogue with, because evaluation does not exist in isolation. Ultimately, we're a part of the organism that is the institution that we're working with. And I believe it'll have to be a collaborative effort, and to the extent that it should be mainstreamed into the operations, and evaluators should not be forced to do what others should be doing, and vice versa. So, yeah, thank you.
Great point. I want to ask you for just sort of one key takeaway that you want to pass on to the audience, considering the topic that you talked about. But you wanted to say something before, I think.
Really respond to the cloud cover question. So do you want to say something first? So I may have oversimplified it a bit. We actually are using whether or not an observation was taken. That is usually cloud cover. It is also due to changes in the angle of the satellite and other resets, et cetera. And so there is a high level, it's not, cloud cover itself is not random and may have some correlation to increases in vegetation, but not to loss in vegetation, and certainly not when you factor in these other random events that prevent the observation from being taken. So I think we feel pretty confident, and our economist is doing some checks on it.
I just wanted to add that for cloud cover, there are, in the pre-processing of the satellite data, there are algorithms that will get rid of the cloud cover, and they won't report that data point. Even with all that, there could be spurious data sets or false positive, and therefore all the satellite data which are produced and published in peer review, they come with uncertainty estimates. Now there is a lot of demand for pixel level uncertainty estimates. So global level uncertainty estimate is no good, because I don't know what's happening in my area and I want to use that data. But now there are pixel level estimates. But even with all that, you could still get false positive. And the better your algorithm is in a local context, the less you'll get false positive. And you learn in the process. So now the fire alerts, people report and they go and report that, oh, this was not a fire. So that feeds into the algorithm. And most of these are machine learning. And next time you'll have better data.